What's up everyone, it's Alex and I'm finally back for another video. It's been a while this time and I just want to say thank you so much for patiently waiting for me to return to this channel. I've been taking these past 4 weeks to really focus on myself. I had been suffering a lot from excessive screen time. I mean, I'm already working from home every day and I was constantly on top of that glued to the news and constantly glued to the latest piece of information that's being released every minute. And it was getting excessive and I felt like I really just needed to take a step back, get my thoughts in order, form some perspective, and calm down, figure things out again. So that's what I've been off doing, and thank you so much for waiting. Now I want to start this video by addressing something that I haven't addressed yet on this platform, whether on the YouTube channel or on the website, and that's the very obvious fact that we are currently in a pandemic. And why I waited to address the pandemic on this channel is because, well, I started this channel back when lockdown had just started in the Boston area where I live. I didn't know what quarantining was going to look like for me yet. I didn't know how the pandemic was going to unfold yet. It didn't really make sense at the time to go straight into addressing what's going on in the world. Also, because I was still finding Bloomin's voice, I was still finding my voice as a YouTuber and figuring out what this platform was going to look like. So again, it didn't make sense to just make pandemic-centric content from the beginning. But now it's been several months and I think it's time to talk about how I, as an international student in the US, am affected by this pandemic. And not just me, but I want to open this conversation up to what this pandemic means for international students in the US right now and in the future. I started this channel because I wanted to give practical advice to international students based on the knowledge and experience I had accumulated over the past 8 years, you know, how to get more financial aid for grad school, how to strengthen your college application. And a lot of the advice that I would have given you pre-coronavirus may not be totally applicable right now. So I think the best way to go forward at the moment is to have a conversation with you guys about what it means to be an international student right now, because that feels like it's changing every day, and to hear what you guys think. And if you're not an international student in the US but you are in another country, I also welcome you to this conversation because I want to know how it's going in other parts of the world as well. So either way, if this topic sounds good to you, then I would love to have you stick around till the end so that we can exchange our experiences in the comments below. So, little side note, you may have noticed that the lighting is a little different in this video, and that's because it rained earlier today and it got dark very quickly, so please bear with my indoor lighting. But that aside, let's get back to the conversation. I figured that one way we can start talking about this is if I start by sharing my experiences of how I've been affected by the pandemic as an international student. So I'm going to be sharing 3 experiences that I've faced so far, and then I would love to hear from you guys. And with that, keep in mind the context in which I'm sharing my experiences. Remember, I'm an international student, but I'm also a graduate student. So some of the things that I'm going through might not look the same for an undergrad student. For example, I didn't have to get kicked off campus because I was already living off campus, and things like that. So yeah, just wanted to say that before we jump right in. But if you're ready, let's go. So the first thing is, of course, remote learning. My school announced early April that it was going remote. It was during spring break, and during break we got an email that basically said, don't come back. And things were very new and up in the air at the time. Basically, we were told to all sign up for Zoom accounts and to be prepared to log on for classes at their regularly scheduled time. Now, personally, I was one of the very few people in my program who was initially excited about remote work because I was thinking, I get to cut my commuting time, I get to save money that would have otherwise been spent on transportation, on eating at cafes around my classes, I get to save money on spending on the occasional late night Uber in case I had to stay on campus late at night, and on top of that, I've just always been a fan of remote work. But very quickly, what I wasn't prepared for, as I had mentioned earlier in this video, is the excessive screen time. I very quickly suffered from screen fatigue. Before the pandemic, when class would start, you would walk into the classroom, put your phone away, and really focus on what the professor was saying. I don't know, maybe you like to have your phone on your desk. But for me, it was really important to be able to tune in to what the professor was saying, and phones were distracting for me. Now that we were all remote, it felt like I couldn't get away from screens because everything revolved around being connected to the internet and having a screen to participate. My classes are each 3 hours long, so each class was like a commitment to stare at a screen for 3 hours, and some classes were back to back, so that's 6 hours in a row. And I worked every day for my assistantship, meeting with students every day to go over their resumes and cover letters, so I, in between classes, was also logging onto Zoom. Some evenings I would have meetings for my extracurricular activities, which meant that I would be on Zoom until or through dinner, so there was just no escaping Zoom. On top of all of that, what I didn't like about being on Zoom for that much is having to stare at my face all the time. I got sick of that very quickly because instead of paying attention to my professor, I found myself checking my hair, checking my face, and it was exhausting just constantly analyzing myself. And then I found myself doing the same to my friends, looking at their backgrounds, wondering why some people had really nice rooms, and then everybody brought their cats to the screen, and there was just so many distractions. For me, that's how I felt. So even though remote learning has been proven to be feasible, I think this past semester my professors did a really amazing job of trying to be lenient, trying to be understanding of our different circumstances. They recorded Zoom lectures to make it accessible to students in other countries who had to go home during the pandemic in different time zones, making final projects optional, being really easy on the grading system. You know, even though everybody made it work and it still turned out okay in the end, it was still a very exhausting experience to increase the amount of time I spend looking at a screen. It makes it hard to make room for mental health, to make room for screen breaks when everything you do suddenly revolves around being online. So number 2 is that the costs of my program have not really changed since going remote, and there's a lot that goes into that. For one, the reason that a lot of international students are drawn to a US education is the promise of a unique on-campus experience, unlike any other. You know, building a relationship with your professors by going to office hours, special facilities, on-campus resources, the experience of hanging out with your friends at the campus cafe to continue the intellectual discussion after class. But these promises also depend on what kind of program you're enrolled in. So maybe if you're in science, you're really missing out on working in a lab right now that you paid a lot of money to study in. For me, in journalism, what they really marketed to us was top-notch studios to do broadcast journalism and podcasting, and even the ability to check out top-quality camera equipment if you're into photojournalism or documentary filmmaking. And the truth is that we're just not getting any of the things we're paying for. And higher education in the US is notoriously expensive, and my program is one of the more expensive ones out there. You pay thousands and thousands of dollars. Some people fork out loans, some people save money for months and years just to be able to afford their program, some people fight for scholarships that they never dreamed of getting, and we're not getting anything we paid for. Now, don't get me wrong, I am totally for staying at home. Remember, we don't have a vaccine yet. And I understand that it's not the school's fault that we had to get cut off from on-campus resources because they had to send us home. I'm not upset that I don't have access to on-campus resources. I'm upset that I'm still paying for them despite not getting them. And next year, tuition is still being raised despite everything that's going on, despite the fact that many of us, many international students, won't be on campus because of travel bans, etc. So I don't really know the answers to this problem, but as an international student who bent over backwards to make this program just barely affordable, it is a little frustrating that we're still being charged full price going forward. The third thing that has been really hard for me as an international student in the US is the increasing travel restrictions worldwide. Now, firstly, I have to say that as a citizen of Europe, I have never really experienced a lot of hardships when it comes to traveling. I have a lot of privilege when it comes to visa applications, to customs and border patrol. I don't have nearly as hard a time as, say, my friends from Yemen or Syria who have to really fight to get a visa approved just to attend a school that has already accepted them. But of course, right now I'm starting to really experience the stress of not being able to check on my family during this pandemic, to not be able to check on my parents, to not be able to spend time with my siblings, to not be able to check on my grandparents who are getting older, my little nieces and nephews that are getting older every day. I wasn't able to see them a lot before the pandemic anyway, just because Singapore is is so far away from the US, and flying that distance is very expensive and time consuming. I mean, you can't just take Thanksgiving break off or spring break off, because traveling that distance in itself takes 2 days, and then there's several days of jet lag, and by the time you're done with that, your trip is basically halfway through and you have to prepare to come back to the US. So it never really made sense. But now, even if I am willing to go through all of that just to see my parents, I can't, because leaving the US right now probably means that I won't be able to come back in after that, even though I have an unexpired visa. And I'm still paying rent here, I'm still interning here for the summer, all of which I am so grateful to have. But having these things that keep me here makes it especially hard knowing that I can't just go check on my family, especially during a time that makes me really want to. Again, I want to acknowledge that my experience is not unique. My friends who come from countries that don't have a good relationship with the US have been struggling with this for years, not being able to see parents when you want, siblings when you want. But to speak for myself, I really miss my family, and I don't like being this far away from them against my will during this pandemic. So those are just some of the ways that I have been struggling as an international student in the US. And now I would really like to hear from you guys, because I don't want my experience to speak for all international students here, because it's just not accurate. We are made up of so many different nationalities, cultural identities, upbringings, languages. We all have different circumstances. So I want to hear from you guys. How have you been affected as an international student during this pandemic? And if you're not an international student in the US, but you are an international student somewhere else, I still want to hear from you. I would love to know what the unique challenges you've been experiencing are, and to think about what the future of being an international student is going to look like, especially with all these travel restrictions in place, US embassies being closed for visa applications. What are you most concerned about right now? Are you applying for OPT? Are you concerned about the recent H-1B suspension? If that's not too heavy, let's talk about it. If you found this video helpful or useful or enjoyable, I would love it if you would give this video a quick thumbs up below. And if you're not yet subscribed to this channel, then please hit that subscribe button so that we can keep talking to each other. That's it from me, guys. Thank you again so much for waiting for me these past few weeks. I hope you like what you saw today, and I will see you in the next video.